complicated, you know, man. Like a dang old Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about that blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like messing up.
All right, Yizz, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I've had a long day, but a good day, and I'm glad to be here talking to you, friend.
I'm glad to have you on. I think that if it would have been up to my planning, this episode never would have happened. So thank you for bearing with me.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. Like you had a bout of sickness. You had the flu or something there for a few days. I'm glad you got over it.
I know. I feel bad because I was at probably about the 50-yard line with about three different people all talking, like you, Chris Gard, and and Todd Lewis. We're all like, "Where in the world did you go?" And I'm like, "Look, you don't want to know. It was bad. It was." I'm trying to be, back among the.
We got it worked out, though. We got it worked out.
Yeah, we did. So obviously, one of the things we were talking, we had a good time before we even went live. Is you're most well known for kind of, I guess, white well-being. So obviously, most of the people are familiar with your work. But if you could give kind of a napkin sketch of who you are, what you do, and then also, what you consider your work here.
Certainly. At buygofree.com, you can find the link to the Go Free manual. This is the book for the Go Free method. I'm also putting the direct Amazon link in your chat since I've got a wrench here. This book is by the man, Jason Kuna, the guy who goes by No White Guilt on YouTube. He is a very fiery, passionate man. He's around my age, and he's from Virginia. He still lives in Virginia, to my knowledge. And he came up with a method of how to use a framework of language to compete against the anti-white narrative. Now, the Go Free in a nutshell is basically, it is a methodology, not an ideology. So it works with being a Christian. It works with being whatever kind of politics you like, whether you're a Mises libertarian, you're a Hoppian guy, or whether you're more like Paul or whoever else it is you're like. This is just a framework of lexicon, dialectics, and speech tools that create a curative contagion to the mental spiritual cancer of anti-whiteism. And for those of you that are here, I'm assuming people that listen to your stream know at least a little bit about war history and American history and that kind of thing. One of the most evil, terrible things ever done to an ethnicity of white people was the denazification of Germany. And the anti-white narrative, the anti-whiteism, is what was done to the Germans, the denazification, but just dialed out and applied to everybody in Western civilization. And the anti-white narrative, the anti-white meme pathogens, that's the name in the Go Free method for the mind cancer. These mimetic pathogens are things like melting pot, we're all one race, all the isms like feminisms and transgenderisms and all this mess. These are things cooked up by people of the Frankfurt School and before that want to disempower, disenfranchise, and strip ethnic cultural identity away from people in the Western world to make us all slaves to our base lusts and material things like football and NASCAR and shit, so they can control us in their global usury network. And the methodology of going free is to use meme curatives, which are counters to that, such as when people talk about whites being colonizers or the West owing people reparations. A meme curative to that is to say, is to say there can be no atonement for a grievance never committed. The only reason that you would want me to be guilty for my ancestors' sins while not celebrating my ancestors' gifts to the modern world is if you want me and my people to not have an identity, or you want an anti-white outcome. So that makes you anti-white, or that makes the point you're making anti-white. You should apologize to me for hating my people and my race. I don't hate your people and your race. My people and my civilization want to uplift everyone. And white people are people too. That kind of talk is what gives positivity to the situation while also being truthful. The Go Free method, like this is why I don't call myself left or right wing. I don't call myself a nationalist or a white nationalist. I don't call myself a liberal or a conservative, because I think all of those camps, those things are going to exist in perpetuity all the time. We're always going to have some kind of socioeconomic structure that we live under. We're always going to have some kind of ism that we live under, whether it's in a monarchy or whether it's in liberal democracy, whether it's in a constitutional republic. That kind of stuff, in my opinion, and in the opinion of all of us white well-being community people, we think that the focus shouldn't be talking about that, because we can't go to Big Lots or to Walmart and pull the regime change lever and say, well, we're going to try this kind of regime, or we're going to change over to this kind of socioeconomic system. The people with power shape that. What most of us can do, all of us commentators on the internet, all the people at your church, all the people that are in your family and your friends and your community group, what we can do is we can talk about the issues around us and talk about the politics around us through the lens of white positivity. And we're Americans, so to us, white just means anybody European descent, right? That's how we use the word. We don't get out the calipers and measure skulls and look at genealogy and play who's white and who's not. That's not what I mean when I say white people. I don't mean something specific. I just mean all of us of proper Western heritage, right? We need to make sure that the way that we speak is to force every organization, every politician, everyone who wants to have power over us. We have to create the framework of language to make them serve the well-being of our people and our progeny, our posterity. So we do that by not participating in the framework of language laid out for us by the anti-white narrative. We don't use the words like racist. That's an anti-white slur. We don't use the concept racism, because when you look at the anti-white regime, specifically the cabal that runs the ADL and the Greenblatts and them, they use the word anti-Semitism, and they make the rest of us use racism because that's inside their evil framework. So we don't use that. We call it anti-whiteism. And when anyone calls you a Karen or calls you a bumpkin or a redneck or a racist or a Nazi or whatever, you immediately become indignant and righteously angry and say, that's an anti-white slur. You're not allowed to call me that. You're not allowed to call my kids that. You take that back. Every time you say that word to me, you're damaging the future of my children and you're teaching my kids to hate themselves. You're not allowed to do that around me. Do you understand? And when you take the righteously indignant path with the correct framework of language, we take back control, the destiny of our people, by forcing anyone who wants to represent us or talk about us to do so through the lens of our people, our ethnic and cultural identity, and what is best for us. So I know that I can't explain it all in just a couple of minutes, but that little 5-minute speech right there is what the Go Free method is about, why it exists, and why it's a moral path forward instead of the older, useless talking points of pointing your finger at the small hats and naming the J, trying to get people to hate immigrants, trying to get people to relearn the history they were never taught. None of that stuff is actionable. While I understand all of that stuff is necessary for a proper understanding of history and entangled ethnic groups throughout our civilization, that kind of talk is not actionable in your normal life to regular people. And when you talk about that kind of stuff, people either dismiss it because they can't understand and don't have the time, or they think you're a crazy evil person for trying to name the J or get them to hate black people or whatever. So this is a moral, intelligent framework of language and behavior that anyone at any social strata and in any political or social group can implement for the well-being and the health of Western people. And since this comes from a Virginian, a proper stars and bars loving Southerner, it's also through the lens of American pride and American identity of us being wonderful, lovable people that care about ourselves and others. And we need to make it be known that we are a good people. We have a good, positive identity. And what's good for us is good for others too. And that's one of the things that is very American about the Go Free approach is we're not just saying what we're talking about is only for white people and everybody else needs to get out of our country. We realize that that's not a possibility and we can't control that. But what we can do is shift the narrative of language to make everyone, whether they're non-white, mixed race, or white, to realize that when you're in a white country, you align to the archetype of the people that made this place great in the first place and that want to continue making it great. And that's God-fearing, good old American people like where I come from in Appalachia, like the good old farming Southerners, like the people in the heartlands of this country. We have to make this the framework about these great people, because when we prosper, the other people that live here with us prosper as well. So I'll go ahead and wrap it up there. That is the Go Free approach, and that's what I believe in, and that's how I identify, is just an advocate for the well-being of white people through the Go Free lens. So there you have it. That's me.
Oh, that's incredibly well said. There's a lot in there that I want to unpack. I like the what you said about essentially kind of like exiting the framework of our enemies. So earlier today, I was listening to Oren McIntyre appeared on the Good Old Boys podcast, which is a podcast I love. Obviously, definitely in our circles, those guys. But what they brought up is essentially that even kind of surprisingly, people you would think plugged in, like on the ground Republicans, have absolutely no concept of exiting, their enemy's framework. And to me, the analogy I always use for it is if your kid's playing a game, and if you're playing Cowboys and Indians, they've already picked the white hat. They've already set themselves up as the good guys. And you see this with Republicans all the time. I can't remember who it was. It was one of the how there's always kind of like a cycle of, blonde, tan, Fox News hosts, and they just kind of cycle out for the other. Mm-hmm. Well, the conversation was about, some transgender bathroom bill. And this was some, admittedly quite ridiculous quote from some Democratic politician. I think it was Bloomberg, who's basically like, "Oh, are you going to have them, are you going to have, trans women go to the bathroom in the bushes?" And I can't remember.
Good Lord.
Like, hell yes, we are. We're going to make him sit out in the bushes all by himself and be miserable. And I just remember, I was like, okay, even if you think that, you've got to realize the optics on that are terrible. You look like
exactly, and that's what we call playing the villain in the anti-white narrative. In the Go Free method, we talk about the anti-white narrative being this narrative of hostile lies and word traps that we are raised from birth to step into willingly. We notice this because Hollywood shows us that the anti-hero or the racist pill-popping bigot is really the only model that you see in Hollywood for a white man to follow. Then, when you get to academia, the anti-white field of psychology and psychiatry, there are all of these landmines and traps laid out for white men to step into, to be the villain, to self-destruct, to sound like a monster, to sound like they hate other people. And that is to turn people against white men and to destroy the relationship that white men and women need together to prosper and have good families and communities. And so, this is why you don't play the villain. So if somebody says, "Are you going to make transgender people pee in the bushes?" You say, "Absolutely not," because that is dehumanizing. I want people to be moral and to be healthy. So males have to use the male restroom. And then you force them into the narrative of having to deny science and reality. And if they continue to do that, you say, you're overstepping the point, and you are speaking lies because you want an anti-white outcome. You want my people to suffer, and you want children to have their heads full of lies because you hate white people, don't you? And you put them on the back foot and force them into our narrative of talking about things. And this is what my whole speech at the Shieldings event this spring was, in front of that room full of 100 guys, or like 107 or however many was there, is I tried to get them to understand the Go Free method is not just for getting people at work or in your church group to understand language. You can use it at every level. You can use it in academia. You can use it in debates. You can use it in politics. This is all about creating the framework that works for us, the real people of America, the spirit of America. And it'll work like, let's say that we're in the UK, right? It could easily just be about the spirit of the people of Albion, the Anglo-Saxon people of England, or the Scottish people of Scotland. Like, this method works for all of us in Western civilization. Of course, I talk about it through the lens of America. That's why I'm here on your stream tonight, because you focus on America. So what I would say then is the framework we need to have is a white positive, male positive approach to making people come into our framework and dispel the evil narrative of lies that keeps us all disempowered. That is the point of not being a villain. You want to be a champion and a hero that other people will look to and go, "Damn right, that's how I feel. I'm going to say that tomorrow at work, and I'm going to kick ass socially too." That's the point of the Go Free method right there too.
Again, that's well said. And I think that it's actually one of the problems I have. And look, like, I really, obviously, like, Thomas is a good friend of mine, so don't take this as an attack on him. But It's always been my my kind of complaint with the, you know, the folks who are really attracted to kind of like the mid-century German stuff. You know, it's like, look, I'm all for revisionism, right? Like I think that is an important story that needs to be told. But all the same, you know, if that's much harder to, that's a much harder argument to make to the average person, you know, when you're dressed up like the version of Satan, quote unquote, you know, that they've
Right.
seen in every single, you know, piece of media. And my point is not to become like, you know, the eternal optics cuck, you know, like eternally trying to like make yourself, you know,
No,
palatable
I mean,
to your enemies.
optics matters to your in group, though. Like, you don't want your in group to think you're an idiot or some crazy hater. Like that's why you don't play the villain. Is that exactly right there? It's not that you're being an optics cut to the enemy's narrative. It's that you don't want to come off like a villain or a hateful person to the people that matter.
No, that's well said. So you used a phrase there, you know, in group, that I think is an important one.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I think kind of trips up the dialogue between, you know, Euros and Americans is that their definition of in group and out group is pretty different. You know, and look, I recognize that for Americans it's a little bit messy, you know, like it's, but also, and this is to borrow something from, you know, Thomas and Paul both have kind of said that the idea of like being like whiteness, not in the, you know, CRT sense, is kind of a American concept.
Yeah.
You know, because essentially, right, when you've got a few thousand people on a massive, unexplored, extremely hostile continent, and your objective is survival, you kind of start to run down on, let's just say, like messy and inexact, you know, in-group, out-group checks.
Yeah.
Right.
And because we're so widely spread out in such a young country, that also makes us have very blurred and thin ethnic identity. And I think that one of the things to say here real quick before we get rolling further is the Go Free method, you don't use words that end in NESS like blackness or whiteness, because those are abstractionist tools that the goalpost can always be moved on. So we don't say whiteness or blackness or any of that. We just say white or black or Asian or something like that. Because the NESS words, that's just a forever shifting nebulous thing that can be used to our detriment. And whiteness and blackness are part of the anti-white narrative, and we don't use those. But I know what you mean when you were saying that, so please continue.
No, fair enough. But my point is, I just think that there is something kind of unique to, and I won't even say the American, because I think that the South Africans came to a roughly similar decision, right? To let's just say colonial experience that kind of breeds that idea of, I guess, like color and race as being roughly synonymous.
Right, which is definitely not. Skin color and eye color is not race. Just like the language you speak is not ethnicity. It's that kind of thing.
Right. It's just I don't mean to sound, you know, like a hand-wringing liberal, but these are kind of like vague terms that you kind of have to, I don't know. I see why so many people get into arguments about them, because they aren't exactly exact terms.
Oh, of course not. Yeah, like even the word white itself, as much as we use it and as much as it's part of our identity, your racial cluster, your biospiritual origin, that's not your ethnicity. Like, your ethnicity is Appalachian, Tennessean, maybe you're Swiss, maybe you're Scottish, right? That kind of, or maybe you're from Newfoundland, maybe you're from British Columbia. That's your ethnicity, right? The reason why race is important and we need a word for it is that's how we're all victimized and attacked. That's why the slogan is no white guilt, because we're not victimized for being American or Canadian. We're victimized for our racial group, our biospiritual origin, being white people of the West, right? Because if you take let's say you take a guy from Sweden and a guy from Germany and a guy from Scotland, and they all look like people that live here in Appalachia, and you bring them here, they're going to get beat with the same anti-white stick that I am, even though they're not even from here. So that's why it's important to have some kind of racial identity word or cluster that we can point to and say, this is part of our identity and this is how we're being attacked, even though a Frenchman, a Scotsman, and somebody from Canada are going to have different ethnicities. So I think that's an important distinction to make here, is that white is not your ethnicity. That's just your racial parent group. I think that's a good way to say it.
That's well said. So I'm curious if we can get into this, and I don't mean
Please.
to kind of like eternally go back to this stream, but it was one that obviously there's been a lot of conversation in, our circles about, America, kind of like the position of America in relation to everything. And I stand by that. I feel like I've enumerated my own position at this point enough. There's 2 hours of me and Bagby talking about it. If you feel like you don't understand it, you're welcome to go back to those streams.
That was a good stream. I listened to that to prepare for my stream with AA and Paul and Furious last week.
Well, thank you, and you acquitted yourself well.
Thank you.
But I'm curious, what would you say? Is there kind of an American ethnos, or do you think that America is made of kind of multiple peoples?
I think that being American is not the same as being Scottish. American is not the same as being a Soodlander. American is not the same as being Finnish or Estonian, because we're much younger. We're from a mostly Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, and Norwegian, Nordic origin. That's where most of us came from originally, I think. And that means that we had 3, maybe 4 primary North European ethnic clusters that were the primary settlers and creators of what the United States of America became. And as such, we carried over those languages, those religious and ethnic expressions, and then we shared those together in the various clusters of states and regions in North America. And so you have 4 or 5 obviously emergent sort of ethnic groups, like Appalachian's a good example. Being from the deep South, that's another example. Being a West Coaster, that's another example. Being a New England person, that's another example. And I don't want to mudsling at Northerners, but, the whole Yankee-Southerner divide around the War of Southern Secession, that really did create an ethnic split in the founding stock of America. And I would argue that since then, there really has been, an ethnic line drawn between the emergent ethnoses in America. What do you think about that? Do you agree with me on that?
Sorry, I had myself muted there. I would agree with you. And this is actually the Civil War, and I realize I'm not an expert on the topic, but I've read enough that, to me, and I guess you could say this about every nation, when I look at, I guess, kind of like the splits in the way America is viewed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the multitude, irreconcilable, it seems like, differences between, like, what is the nature of America? What is America for? And maybe you could say, oh, well, it's Hamilton and Jefferson, and you have a good argument there. But to me, the point at which it becomes, oh, these are differences which cannot be like wallpapered over. Like, this is a flaw that runs the core of the nation. That really starts at, 150 years ago.
Yeah. And then it's galvanized in the 30s and 40s with the New Deal and the Long March through the institutions, where that was basically the denazification of the United States. That's when that started. And that is what we call the anti-white narrative. That's when the anti-whites from all over Europe came here, and the seat of anti-whiteism changes. It might happen to be New York and DC right now, but it also is Brussels. It also is London. It also is Berlin. Like, there's a lot of seats of power for these evil internationalist, globalist anti-whites that are behind all of this, the Frankfurt School especially. And that cancer grew from that period between the 1860s and the 1930s until eventually, through the machinations of their doing, them orchestrating the brother wars and getting us to kill each other, then all of the cancer came to America because it was just ripe. And so they plucked it. They plucked it and they set up shop here. And I think that's why America has become the, quote, GAE, the global anti-white empire, is because they infected and infested the governance of this country to create the war machine that emerged in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So now I know that sort of got away from the point you were making there, but this is why I say that we have obvious emergent ethnicities in the United States. And it's important to realize that doesn't mean that we're not like Europeans. It means we are Europe. We are an extension of Europa. Look at Europe. you have these many different ethnicities that for hundreds and hundreds of years after the rising and falling of different expressions of the Roman Empire, we had hundreds of years to become different ethnicities. Yes, we warred on each other. Yes, there were disagreements, but we observed each other's ethnic boundaries. And that, in my opinion, is just a natural evolution of Europe, is what the United States is supposed to be and what it was in the antebellum era. It was, we are of European descent, we are organizing ourselves similarly to Europe, and we're doing something in a newer way. Now, you can argue all along that, oh, George Washington and Hamilton is just a product of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I get all of that, okay? I get all that. But my point is, all that we do, all that our ancestors have done, are biospiritual reflections of our race parent group, the Caucasoids, the Europeans, the white people. We create organizations, religions, states, governance that reflect our people's genetics, our spiritual expression onto the world around us. And that's why these United States are like Europe, is because we are the same people that create and govern ourselves in similar ways to the stock that we came from. And so that's why I don't think it's correct to say there is a singular American ethnicity. We are all American ethnicities of the European parent group. So I put that to you. What do you think about that?
I'm with you on that. And to me, like, and obviously a lot has been made of, Yaki and Spangler recently. And I think I'm more partial to Spangler than Yaki. But, there is something like truly kind of Faustian about America. And like a lot of people, I have, and forgive me a digression here, but when the weather changes, like a mood strikes me a certain way. And for whatever reason, that kind of like first, and I'm sure you got it a week or so earlier, being in the mountains, but when that first kind of like cold mornings of a fall hit, I get the urge to just, wake up early and listen to country music. And as dumb as that sounds, right, you do kind of realize that there is something, and I think the Australians get this too, of having a just vast kind of like untracked, wilderness to kind of, make your own. That is kind of fundamentally, Faustian. Like, I will go and make it mine. I will conquer it. I will build in it. And so I think that there is definitely kind of like something identifiably, kind of like deeply European in that. And I think it's why it was so attractive to, such a wide variety of, Europeans, kind of like deeply embedded in our kind of like collective psyche at the very, very deep level is that kind of like urge to, to conquer and explore.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's good. I think that's healthy. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think that it has, however, led to a particular problem that we have now, because with the spirit of Americans being heightened like it was through the 17 and 1800s, we were easily led by the nose, and I hope you take my pun because we're on YouTube. We were easily led by the nose to fight and die in their wars, to their detriment. I mean, to our detriment and their benefit over enslaving us. And I think that is one of our greatest strengths, is what you just talked about, but it was also what was weaponized to thwart us and to pit us against each other. And that's the thing that I talk about a lot on my channel and in my work, is the reason why we need some kind of shared piece of identity is to get us all to say, okay, what do we have in common? Now, what does an outgroup who also has something in common, why does this outgroup that lives among us try to get us to not have an identity we share and make war on each other all the time? And in one side, and out of one side of their mouth, they say they're white, and out of the other side of their mouth, they say they ain't. And these are the people that trick us, that push transgenderism, that control us with financial usury, and also try to control us via war machine and kill each other all the time. And we have to have some kind of positive vision, some kind of healthy ethnic identity that we can share together, so we can have some kind of end group to use against that hostile group that has infiltrated us. Because the Huns ain't at the gate. The Huns are in our churches and in our banks and in our stores manipulating us. The Huns are already inside. We got to do something about that before we can do anything else.
Yeah, it reminds me very much. So there's this term in Greek tragedy, right? Your hamartia, and there's a million ways to say it because as the line goes, there's a million ways to incorrectly speak Greek.
Uh-huh.
But and the idea behind it, and you recognize it in Shakespeare and any kind of tragedy, is kind of like your fatal flaw, and it's the thing that in many ways it's kind of the thing that carried you this far is what ultimately dooms you.
Uh-huh.
So for Achilles, right, it's the rage of Achilles, which made him incredibly powerful in battle, but ultimately kind of like blinds him as well. It leads to his downfall. And there's kind of different versions of this. And to me, I can't help but see the same kind of like, tragedy in the kind of like Western independence. On one hand, like it made us great. Not to say that we won't be great again, but there's something to be said for the fact that like that same type of independence, which basically said like, oh, I'm going to go off on my own, I'm going to make something. It's also the same type of independence that almost like has made collective action almost impossible to a certain level. It's
Yep.
like just not something we know how to do.
Mhm.
Because and that was something that served us incredibly well for a long time. But
Yep.
now that same great talent is almost kind of,
Yep.
I don't know how to describe it, but it is almost dooming us.
It is. And I think to go along with that, our good traits being weaponized against us, I know that we get called colonizers and imperial dogs and shit all the time by the anti-whites, but there's a lot of nobility in the way that Western man conquered and explored and built empire. We aren't like the Middle Easterners and the Asians that conquered and enslaved and murdered horribly and used a much more brutal version of conquest. The way that white people of the last 1,000 years traveled and interacted with South America, Africa, Asia, India, we saw a beauty in the noble savage. We saw a beauty in the primitive man. We saw a beauty in the advanced man of India and China that was not like us, but also advanced. And we brought back the tools, the artwork, the fashion all around the world, the places, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the English that we went and made empire. And we are an evolution of those people. And one of the traits, I think, of the noble minded white man is seeing beauty in all expressions of man, no matter what race or color or religion, and feeling like it's our place to morally, spiritually shepherd all of us towards a better tomorrow. You can call it the eternal Anglo if you want, but not just Anglo people did this. The Portuguese did it, the Spanish did it, the French did it. I think this is part of our biospirit is we genuinely love all the creatures of nature, man included. And we want to take, whether it's the glory of God with the Catholic or Christian empire, whether you want it to just be Faustian man who wants to inspire other men to reach for the stars and create something great, that spirit is in us. We have that spirit of noble empire in us. And when you see the people that have taken over and subverted us, these internationalist people that I call the anti-white oligarchs, these people do not build empire like that. The global American empire, or the global anti-white empire, as we call it, they don't do that. They want to dissolve and destroy everyone's ethnic and religious identity and enforce this cancerous, hollow, consumerist identity in its place. It is one of the most evil, non-white empires I can imagine, which is what, unfortunately, our country is doing to half the world right now. And that is, again, one of our strengths and noble qualities being subverted for evil. So that's what I wanted to share about that.
It reminds me very much of that, Rudyard Kipling poem, The White Man's Burden, which Chris Gard, who's in the chat, he did a great musical rendition of it. And when you look in the actual data on it, you realize that essentially the colonies were kind of awash as far as finances. They were quite expensive to run, and it kind of came out to about even, one way or another. And on one hand, and this is a line from Charles Haywood, The Worthy House, and I think he has a point where he's like, look, the West conquered the world for God, gold, and glory, and they didn't see much of a difference between any of the three. And so on one hand, it's easy to look at that and be like, oh, well, they were getting rich. And yeah, they were getting rich. That was a big part of it. They were capturing treasure. But also, it's kind of this big row has gone around over Columbus Day, the eternal, just self-flagellation over Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
But you've got to realize, like, these men were, for all their faults, which they may or may not have had, like, they were, one, true believers. Two, they were, to a certain degree, they viewed what they were doing as kind of like ultimately humanitarian. And look, I don't ask you to agree with them. I don't ask the audience to agree with them. You may or you may not. You have to realize, like, if you really do believe that essentially, like, you are saving someone from, kind of eternal damnation, you can justify an awful lot, and like at the very least, you have to look at their premise and look at their conclusions and say, okay, well, there's some kind of line there. This isn't this just like new, uniquely European, evil that kind of these, white devils invented, right? Like conquest is a human behavior. It's something that people do. And yeah, there are better and worse ways to do it. And on balance, except for the Belgians. The Belgians are real pieces of shit, and they kind of get away from it. But
don't get me started on Brussels.
That's mostly a joke, but not really at the same time. On balance, right? Like the European empires didn't do such a bad job. Like really, humans are not particularly kind to each other, and obviously it's different if it's if it's your neck under the boot, but all the same, right? Like it's very easy to kind of like look at the evil, our evil ancestors as essentially like subhumans.
Yeah, and I don't talk about, and I don't use language in normal parlance like white supremacy or Aryan spirit or that kind of thing, because like I said in the chat a minute ago, most people don't know what that is, or if they hear that kind of talk, they think they automatically associate it with what they've been taught by the media and Hollywood to associate it with the anti-white Nazi narrative. But when I think of the nobility and the quote-unquote superiority of Western man, what that means to me is there's something in us that makes us feel like we have to be the stewards of all that is because we love it, and we are the ones that feel burdened to care for it, to make sure that we all are going towards a healthy direction. And that's what the white man's burden is. It's not that, oh, har, we're better than other people, let's just treat them like dirt and make them slaves. I think only genuinely evil, cruel people think that way. Everyone in our side of things that cares about the ethnos of Western people, we all feel a serious responsibility to making all of our civilization better and to be a guiding light for the other kinds of man to follow. And I think that is the genuine truth to superiority or supremacy. And I think that long ago, I think white man was guided by that to create empire and to do the great things he did in the long past. Unfortunately, that's been subverted with jingoism and weaponized nationalism and all that shit for the last couple hundred years. But I do think that spirit still remains in us, and that sets us apart from all the other kinds of men on earth. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's something to it, and I don't know. So this is if you can permit a personal digression. So my fiance's in-laws have been in town recently, and her grandmother's a very odd lady. So one of the big things that you see anywhere on the internet is every once in a while, some tradcath or pagan LARPer type will basically find a church in some progressive city doing something admittedly heinous and say like, oh, haha, we got the Christ cucks, we got the prots, we got them now, look at how stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And so that obviously I think that's, not a particularly like interesting dialogue to go down, except for the fact that
and it's negative.
Oh yeah, it's negative and not particularly, helpful. But my fiance's grandmother is a part of one of these churches. And despite being a very old woman, she's in her late 80s, she's essentially a gender racial communist, which is quite, admittedly, in a certain perspective, is kind of funny. Like it is just really amusing. But it is, on one hand, also kind of disturbing to see how someone who is, and I think a big part of it is being of a generation where the approval of others was something you sought out. You wanted to be respectable. And that was a good that was a good instinct in 1955. You know, like that would lead you in a general, like a pro-social way. But there's something to be said for the fact that like that instinct is no longer like the seas that we swim in have changed, you know, and obviously she is, you know, much like you were saying, this kind of like this false nationalism, this jingoism.
Mm-hmm.
I see someone who's been pulled along by kind of this desire for social respectability and kind of like patriotism, but patriotism in a weird way. You know,
yes.
the patriotism
yes.
of Lincoln and kind of like NPR, you know, which
I don't know if you saw a couple of years ago on Cigar Stream. I did a featured one-on-one with a visitor with AA where I talked about nationalism and patriotism and how it's been subverted and how it has come to mean something completely different now. Did you remember that stream? Did you watch it?
No, I actually found I said this and it came across a little bit more abruptly than I meant it. I actually found AA very early in his career, like right when he and Sargon and the Britisher were all part of a big thing together. And I
wasn't even listening to him back then.
I just like happened to find him, and it was when they were doing Dictator Top Trumps, and I couldn't stand the Britisher so much.
I know.
I just completely like I was like, nope, I'm not listening to it. And so, never listen to AA again because he always had the Britisher on.
Well, that's fine. We don't have to sidetrack on that. I just wondered if you were privy to all I had to say on that. Like,
I missed a massive amount of his backlog because up until a year and a half ago, I was like, no, I can't do it. I can't listen to the Britisher.
Yeah. But no, I bring it up because I agree with you about the change of what even the concept of nationalism meant, because even though in Merriam-Webster it's still defined a certain way, that's not really what it's been the last 80 years. It's basically been a jingoistic perversion of patriotism is what nationalism has become. Nationalism now, except for some people in the old guard of the white nationalists and stuff, most people don't even use that word the way that it is quote unquote supposed to mean. That's one of the reasons I don't really identify as a nationalist anymore. I don't want people to get the wrong idea about what I'm about. Like, I'm not about going to war and conquering people or using tanks and bullets to try to make my people more powerful. I'm not about that. I'm only about the well-being of all Western people and ending the war machine. Now, I know that there's always going to be human conflict. That's just how apes are here on the Third Rock. But the way that we have paired military action with the words nationalism and even patriotism now to a degree, which is sad, that needs to be diffused, because that will be the death of us all at the hands of the anti-white narrative. I don't want us to be led by the nose to kill each other anymore, if you know what I mean. Well,
and that's one of the things that and living in the area we do, and this is definitely changing, you know, maybe for the good. But people from our neck of the woods have essentially been, you know, like the Janissaries of the American Empire for a long time. Mm-hmm. You know, almost immediately after the Civil War, you know, both the officer corps and the...
I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't call it that. I'd appreciate it if you call it something else.
Fair enough. So sorry. What I was saying is that essentially there's a martial tradition, you know, in the South. Right?
Definitely.
And that's obviously, there's been some glory involved in that. You know, like I'm sure you know that there are probably, you know, in a 50-mile radius of, you know, where you live. And I don't know where you live, but this is true. I know it's
I live
true.
in Appalachia, and on every side of my family, the men have bled and died for every war that this damned country has done for the last 150 years. And
exactly. And that's what I'm saying. I guarantee you there's 3 or 4 veteran cemeteries within a 50-mile radius of you. Because there's 3 or 4.
Probably more than that, to be honest with you. There's probably more than that. I could name 3 or 4. There's probably more than that.
And I noticed this, and there's other places too. Like actually, like far north New England is the same way. You know, essentially like you know, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. And I've had a lot of time this summer to kind of drive across the country, and mm-hmm. You really get off the main roads, you realize that there are tiny little communities of, you know, founding stock Americans.
Yep.
Essentially, you know,
I live in one.
essentially been, you know, blown up, shot to pieces, you know, maimed for their lives, and for what? You know, they're and I'm talking the most cynical take you possibly could take. You could at least look at World War I, World War II, and say like, all right, well, America came out on the other side. They had more money than when they started.
Yep.
Like, I'm not saying that's moral, but at
Right.
least like the average American was doing better before and after.
Yeah.
But since then, it becomes gradually more and more difficult to make that argument, and it's why I agree with you so much that like ending whatever this war machine is, not necessarily out of some like dewy-eyed pacifism, like, oh, we're gonna put a
Right.
daisy in the the muzzle of the rifle, that'll show the
Right.
man, but just the fact that like this is a raw deal for us, and for
Right.
people like us, we're not. And look, I'm not trying to pretend to be something that I'm not. I'm a thoroughly, I'm a college educated middle class guy, but I mean, look, like I've got a lot of friends who are, maybe a little bit older than me, but not that much, who, when 9/11 came around, they were like, all right, well, it's my time to go, and
Yeah.
some of them didn't make it. Some of them
What a
barely.
travesty all that was.
And for what, and
Yep.
that's why it's like, I
It's like, hey, a bunch of scrupulous people with connection to intelligence agencies in America and the United States did horrible terrorism and blew us up. So we're going to blame a bunch of Saudis. So now we're going to go kill a bunch of Iraqis and then invade Afghanistan. And hey, all of you subverted, jingoistically, patriotically subverted young men, why don't you go get yourselves killed and throw your lives away for what? So that this evil regime can have more money and more oil and more control over everybody else. That's what we've been fighting and dying for all these generations. And it's bullshit. We need to
much
stop
like
this.
much like we said about, other things, it's very much taking advantage of people's best nature, like the urge to, patriotism and essentially to protect hearth and home. Like that is a good instinct. Your best, the best men in your community have that instinct and respond, as such. And so, to me, at least, it's why I, coming out of all of this discussion about, about America, am fully comfortable, completely and totally, divorcing myself at whatever level from, the American empire, because it has our name on it, but it's not for us, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know. It's sort of like if you find out that, let's say you're part of an empire that served your people, and you and your forefathers fought for this empire for generations, and then all of a sudden you find out for the last 2 or 3 generations that the emperor and his council and all the people that are his baronesses and countesses and shit all throughout the land, that they're just shape-shifting aliens that have only come to this earth because they want to extract the wealth and resources from it. Unfortunately, though, your entire identity and sense of purpose is wrapped up in this machine that they've created for you to grow up in. And it's very difficult to find a way to have healthy identity that gives you energy and pathos when you know that almost all of that has been a lie to get you to fight and die for their profit. It's a very dark place to realize that you're in. So that's why I like the white positivity of the Go Free method, is it's given somebody a reason to feel like they can have healthy identity to come out of this dark pit that we all find ourselves in these days.
No, that's well said, and I think that it's always a difficult balancing act on our side of things, because on one hand, it's like you want to look at things very honestly, and there's a certain part of that that's grim. Like, look, like things in our neck of the woods aren't necessarily, going particularly well, right? There's a lot of the crises that have hit, our country have hit our area of that country particularly hard.
Yeah, definitely.
But on one hand, it's like you have to look at that, kind of like soberly, really like look in the mirror and say like, all right, well, things are a bit grim. But I like the kind of more positive, tact you've taken to it, because the term black pilled is thrown around and it's not particularly useful. Most of the time it's just, I don't like this, therefore it's black pilling.
Yeah.
But I think there is a real, nihilism. And I think you see it more in the kind of like, the Chan culture, the image board culture, the essentially like, well, it's all just pointless. So just like drown yourselves in, endless escapism. And I know that, that Peterson has a bad name in these circles, and he's earned a lot of it. I'm not saying that anyone should follow him or agree with really anything he has to say. But I think that the reason that he did so well for himself is because he essentially did offer a check to narcissism and a kind of a positive way forward. And I like what you've done because it is a positive way forward. And I think that that's something we are in dire need of in these circles.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why I understand that men who want to fight, passionate, fire-hearted, or fiery-minded young men, the negative vision, like clear them out, or the unfortunate playing the villain traps of blame the immigrant, blame the J type of thing. We need to cultivate a positive vision to go along with a negative vision for our people, for our men and for our women, because the negative vision has to be paired with a positive vision, or you're only playing into this jingoistic trap that we've laid out and talked about tonight. And that's where I think the Go Free method and the general term of just white to mean Western, and by the way, white and Western for this purpose is completely synonymous. You can say anti-Western narrative. You can call them the anti-Western oligarchs. If the word white is particularly triggering to your audience, you can use the word Western as long as you let it be known that it means the same thing in some way. So the positive vision of the Go Free method is we all have a shared ancestry, and we're all being attacked and disempowered because there are evil oligarchs who want this spark in us to be extinguished forever, and we can't let that happen. We have to build positivity, positive communities, positive marriages, raise our children and our children's children on truth instead of lies, and give them something. Build a business for them. Teach them how to farm and to hunt and to trade. Teach them to build things that will benefit their folk, their kin, their families, their local communities. We have to instill positivity and build culture, because a negative vision and pathos to do harm to your tormentors does not build the cultural structure we need to have healthy, lush families and thriving trade and business and communities. These things are part of a whole. And we have to have the positive part to go with the negative vision part of let's go after our enemies and get them and stick it to them, right? So we have to build positivity. And I think this is where a lot of women, a lot of people who aren't combative men like yourself, who are more academic, or let's say we have some fiery religious people among us, we need them to cultivate culture and positive vision, while the more firebranded, let's go get them warrior-hearted men can lean more into the negative vision and go after our enemies aggressively. So that's why I think we have to cultivate the Go Free method and use the ideas and the language and the meme curatives of this Go Free idea to add the necessary glue that will keep us together and help us build something positive, while we are hopefully clearing out the bad people from our local governments and schools and things as we create better ones.
Well, that's well said, Yizz. We're coming up on time, and so is there anything you want to say as we kind of bring this thing to a close?
Oh, I didn't realize we were just going for an hour. Yeah, no, I've spoken everything I'm passionate about and the things I think need to be said about cultivating an identity. I will, as a closing statement, earlier this year, I created banners to go on all my social media and all my sites that just says, to recapture our destiny, we must build community. And that's because I am more of the positive vision. I want to network people together of all the dissident camps, of whether it's a MAGA patriot, whether it's a disaffected liberal, whether it's someone who is racially minded and comes from an old guard white nationalist or alt-right camp. I want to unify everyone together who says we need to have a functional ethnos to have a future and to have a good country. And I want these people to step outside the anti-white narrative. I don't want them to play a villain. I don't want them to lean heavily into the villain narrative. And I also want them to step towards a positive narrative of creation. Our people must build and create for us to have a future. We can't just be against something. We have to be for something. Everyone listening to me right now, be that something in your life. Be the husband, the wife, the mother, the father, the teacher, the preacher that we need. Build a business. Do something positive to create with your time on this rock. Build something that you can leave to others. And while you're doing it, do it through a healthy lens of going free. And I'll end on that.
That's a hell of a way to end, Yizz. That was well said.
Thank you.
So obviously, Yizz's links are down in the description. I really suggest you guys check it out. Before we move on to my links, there are a few things I want to get out of the way, which is that YouTube is a terrible, horrible garbage service. And so as such, I have missed about 4 super chats, which I'm going to address now on various streams.
Okay.
Just because I feel bad and these people paid for it and I feel like they get to say their piece. And even if Susan won't tell me about it, I'm going to tell you guys about it. So I'm making it your problem. All right. So Escalating Entropy said 2 different things, which is first, more people should learn about the 1970 Hard Hat Riot. I completely agree. And no group has been more propagandized than the Boomers. Those are both on my October 5th show with Thomas. I agree on both of those points. I mean, essentially, and Yizz, you can back me up on this. I feel like the Silent Generation and the Boomers especially were kind of the first group that got essentially all of their tastes catered to and kind of created by marketing. And that kind of led to a variety of destructive ways. Paul Fahrenheit on a stream where I went. Yeah, this was I think you were in the chat for this. I can't remember, but I found one of my old feminist teachers' blogs and had a grand old time reading through her.
Yeah, I caught a little bit of that. I wasn't there for all of it, but I caught a little bit of it.
It was thoroughly ridiculous. But he said, "Much love to my friends," which was nice. And then this is a bigger one, both in dollar and content, but I cannot read the name of it. It is, I'm sorry, that is incomprehensible. That is not English. That is Moonrune. This does kind of, dovetail neatly with what we said. Fun fact, more people died in the 20 years of the Iraq War than died in 500 years of the entire Crusades era. Yep. God did judge us for this. Let us learn. Fair enough on that last part. But I do think it's interesting that we hear so much about kind of like the horrors of colonialism, the horrors of the Crusades. And look, like I wouldn't want to live through those things if I had the choice. But also like we can't deny that this current regime, like the total state, the anti-white regime, whatever you want to call it, like it's just as bloody. It's just better at hiding it. And whether it's here, it's in Syria, it's on the southern border, like there are human casualties of this and never let them forget it. All right. And so that I think brings the actual content of this to an end. Obviously, like I've said before, this show is available on YouTube. It is also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts, this show can be found. And the way that scheme works is the most recent 10 episodes are always free on the podcast app. And then if you want the audio version after that, it goes behind a $5 a month paywall on my Substack. And as Thomas said, if you can't afford $5 a month, what are you doing listening to this? You're a hobo at that point. They'll always be free on the YouTube channel. And obviously, if you guys enjoy it, like, comment, subscribe, all those kind of things. And check out Yizz's stuff. I've put her Find My Friends link down in the in the description. And remember, guys, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night, everyone.